委員在場，不如我哋開始好嘛？
Well, it's time, the appointed time, and we have a quorum. Let's get started. We invite the officials to join us now. To save time, I will not introduce the witnesses one by one. Well, so welcome to the public hearing on the Director's Audit Report number 60. The audit report was submitted to this on the 17th of April. This is a committee set up under the Council to conduct hearings into Director of Audit's report in relation to money for value for money audits. This is a measure to monitor public expenditure. And we'll look at the evidence gathered related to facts in the audit report so that we can be forward-looking and come up with constructive views for the way forward. And the important thing is to learn from past experience and also our comments on the performance of government officials and related people so that the administration can improve the control on public expenditure. The committee, PAC, would study the audit reports and, if necessary, conduct a hearing like today's hearing. We have come up with the necessary procedure to make sure that all related parties will have a fair chance to be heard. When we ascertain the facts, we are going to make our own conclusions based on those facts and to come up with concluding remarks and recommendations for the report. According to our paragraph 72 of our rules of procedure, within 3 months of the tabling of the audit report, we have to submit a report of our own. And prior to that, members of this council that will not make comments in the name of individual members or as the PAC as a whole. We have decided to invite officials to attend our meetings to answer questions in relation to 3 chapters. Apart from today's hearing, we have earmarked the 4th of May this year for another public hearing. Today's public hearing is in relation to Chapter 3 of Director of Audit's Report number 60, and that is the pre-primary education voucher scheme. We have Mr. Eddie NG, Secretary for Education, Mrs. Cherry TSE, Permanent Secretary for Education, Mrs. Betty Yip, Deputy Secretary for Education 3, Miss Hera CHUM, the PAS, Miss Rhoda CHAN, PAS, Mr. WU Po-ling, PAS, Mr. Kenneth CHENG, Administrative Assistant to Secretary for Education, and Mr. YEUNG King-fai, Senior Education Officer. And I would like to welcome Mr. Davidson and Mrs. Ng from the Audit Commission, as well as a number of other officials from the Audit Commission. After this introduction, I would like to invite members to declare their interest, if any, in relation to this chapter in the audit report. If not, may I invite the Secretary for Education to give an opening speech. Thank you. Good morning. The Education Bureau welcome the audit report on the pre-primary education voucher scheme. We are glad that the report recognized the contribution of the pre-primary education voucher scheme, pointing out that the voucher scheme has enhanced kindergarten education and reduce financial burdens on the part of parents. And it's also pointed out that under the voucher scheme in recent years, we have seen substantial improvement in professionalism and quality of pre-primary education. It indicates that since its introduction in 2007-2008, the voucher scheme has served its major policy objectives. Unlike the subvented primary and secondary sector, kindergarten education has always been provided by private organizations. They are flexible and adaptable and full of vitality. We launched the voucher schemes with a view to reducing financial burden of parents and at the same time retaining the flexible and adaptability of kindergarten education system. In launching the scheme, we have been complying with the rules and the policy objectives as approved by the CE in Council, and also we have been expanding funds in accordance with the criteria and scope set out by the Finance Committee of this Council. So there has been a suitable regulatory system for the voucher scheme. Under the voucher scheme, the government do not provide funds directly to kindergartens, and therefore the way that kindergartens under the scheme are regulated are unlike other subvented organizations. There is a suitable monitoring and control system for participating kindergartens, especially in relation to the fees that they charge and other fees and charges that they would collect from parents to protect parents' interests. We have also required a certain disclosure level of information to enhance transparency and prevent abuse of public funds. Since its introduction, and in the light of our reviews, we have been monitoring the performance and rolling out improvement measures since in 2009 and 2010. And we will continue to work with the sector to improve the voucher scheme. The audit report provides us a good opportunity to make it even better. We would carefully look into the recommendations in the report and take appropriate follow-up action. Expanding our free education to 15 years, and the provision of better kindergarten education is one of the focus initiative of this administration. So therefore, the recommendations on the governance of kindergartens in the report and the recommendations therein are very good reference material for us. We have set up a special committee on free kindergarten education on the 8th of April to look into various issues and possibilities and options, so that we can come up with concrete recommendations on how to provide a free kindergarten education in Hong Kong. I'll pause here. We'll listen to members' views, and we are very happy to take questions. Well, I think the member who is in charge of this particular chapter is Mr. Alan Leung. So I will hand over to Mr. Leung for some opening remarks. Thank you, Chairman. The speech of the Secretary clearly demonstrates that he has been trying to understand what the report is about from his subjective perspective. If you look at point number 2 of his speech, he's very happy that from the outset the report recognizes the value of the voucher scheme. I don't know how the Secretary can see this as a positive recognition. If it's a fully quote, I think it's in paragraph 3. The Audit Commission audit recognizes the contribution of the voucher scheme in easing the financial burden on parents. So the recognizes means recognition. It's not really a positive affirmation. I think there's a lack of reflection on the part of the Secretary. He has failed to think why the voucher scheme, when we spend more than $2 billion, has achieved very little. There are two policy objectives here, Chairman. One is to reduce the financial burden on parents. The second is to enhance kindergarten education quality. On both counts, the objectives have not been accomplished. As you've said, Chairman, we are very fair. We'll give sufficient opportunities to the Secretary and the officials to clear away, if possible, our worries and doubts. If you look at the objective of reducing financial burden on parents, according to the report, yes, school fees have dropped to some extent. Meal fees are subject to the regulation. But what about miscellaneous fees? Fees for school uniforms and so on and so forth? Whether the parents end up saving money, I have a lot of doubts. In terms of improving kindergarten education quality, let's look at some objective figures. According to the objective set by yourself, that is by 2011-12, all kindergartens must have completed the Certificate of Education program. All kindergarten kinders must be qualified kindergarten teachers. On both counts, you have failed. So the voucher scheme has failed to accomplish the original objectives. From a value for money audit perspective, I would say it's a failure. We are spending more than $2 billion a year, and that's what we have achieved. I think the Secretary for Education should reflect upon what has been done and seek improvement. And now he told us that on the 8th of April, a committee on free kindergarten education was set up, which would look into the recommendations of the audit report thoroughly. But he has no position about that. He has taken no position about that. You asked for funding approval from this council for the voucher scheme, and now we have the results as set out in the audit report. So what is the Secretary's review, or Secretary's views on this? You may say that we are not interfering with the kindergarten's operation, we're just subsidizing the parents. I will not accept such a reply. The biggest problem is this. Have you understood this? Actually, the audit report has touched on this. Why is the wastage and turnover rate of kindergarten teachers so high? And that is, they tend to change jobs. They hop from one kindergarten to another. And why is that so? It's because they are overloaded with workload. And the pay doesn't really reflect their duties and respect that they should be paid by the community. And the number of kindergartens participating in the voucher scheme has been on the decrease over the years. And if you just ask the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education to look into that, that's not sufficient. If you don't want us to give you some harsh remarks and comments on your work, I hope you would do something to allay worries and concerns in relation to the issues set out in the audit report. Otherwise, the outcome would be nothing but giving you very harsh comments in our report. I hope I'm upfront with our approach at the very beginning, so that all officials should bear this in mind in dealing with the report. Chairman, there were two policy objectives at the very outset. Reducing financial burdens on parents, and second, enhancing kindergarten education quality. Is the Secretary happy with the results? If the answer is yes, I would like to know the justifications. If he's not happy with the results, then before the PAC comes to its own conclusions, as a politically appointed official, so what kind of reflection would the Secretary be prepared to make? Do you accept the results? Thank you for your question. There are 2 points which I think are important. In 2000, kindergarten education was something purely provided by the private organizations concerned, and then we took the first step in launching the voucher scheme. At that time, we understood that the financial burden was heavy on parents, and also the teaching qualifications held by kindergarten teachers was somewhat doubtful. And that's why we had this voucher scheme targeting the problems, and we set the 2 objectives as referred to by the member. If we look at how much the parents have to pay for kindergarten education, we'll be able to understand the point better. That is before the voucher scheme in 2006-2007. Kindergarten parents have to pay $15,169 per annum, and after that, on average, school fee average was $3,500. So it dropped, the fee dropped from $15,000 to $3,300. We can regard this as an improvement in one of many stages of improvement. And the member also referred to kindergarten teaching qualifications. Actually, in a previous hearing, the sector, there were two sessions, and the kindergarten sector told us that the voucher scheme had enabled them to improve the qualifications tremendously. Only 13 or 2% of kindergarten principals are not yet duly qualified, and only 14% of kindergarten teachers have not yet been qualified. And if you look at the wastage rate in the intervening years, the 2 figures are not bad at all. I hope that through collective efforts, we'll be able to reach or accomplish more and better results. And I have also stressed that we need to fine-tune and improve as we move along, and that as we move towards the provision of 15 years of free educations, we'd like to work out policy improvements. And that's why I stress the importance of continuous improvement. Some members have mentioned that for some individual components, for example, we can look into the details of what should be done for the decoration system, and also the individual cases that have been examined by the audit. As regards the wastage and turnover, before the voucher scheme was launched, it was more 11 or 12%, and those teachers left for good. And now it's dropped to 7.1%. So at least more people would remain in the kindergarten education sector. And in as regards the kindergartens under study, they have seen an improvement in wastage rate this year. I can provide more details in due course.
There has been some improvement, but there is still room for further fine-tuning, and I accept the report saying that we need to expend more effort in certain areas to further fine-tune. Well, is this review sufficient, Mr. Leong? Of course it's not enough, but there are still a lot of opportunities. He has more than 3 hours to respond. I'm sure other legislators will continue questioning, but in relation to his first response, I'd like to ask, the Secretary says that tuition, yes, there are only 6 kindergartens where their tuition rate is higher than the subsidy. But does it mean that the parents don't have to pay for textbooks? They don't need to pay for birthday parties? They don't need to buy stationery? They don't need to pay for snacks? They don't have to pay for a school bus? They don't need to purchase school uniforms? I'd just like to labor on this issue first. We see in the audit report, paragraphs 2.24, 2.25, he's just approving tuition and lunch fees. In other transaction trading activities, the kindergartens have other means or to add to the financial burden. We see that they have to provide statements of trading activities, but these transactions are now labeled under other operating income, and I feel this is very problematic. But I need to state in advance that I do sympathize with kindergartens, because the government is aware that the kindergartens have to rent premises, and we have a real estate hegemony. The rents rocket every year, so where do they get the funds? You are now regulating tuition fees, so they need to balance their income through other means. So they also have trouble recruiting kindergarten teachers. Teachers feel they're not respected, their salaries do not reflect their importance, and the Secretary refers to turnover. But to the education panel and this panel, we focus on the wastage. There are 26 kindergartens where 60% of staff transfer to other kindergartens. 6 out of 10 change jobs. So this is the difficulty kindergartens are facing. They have a shortfall of staff, they have high rents. Do we have any initial response on turnover? Thank you, Chairman. On turnover, from July last year, in our engagement, we had a focus on this area. We identified a few scenarios. Those kindergartens participating in the voucher scheme and those that did not participate. The participating kindergartens had a better turnover. The second aspect, where we looked at working hours and market conditions, we found that when the labor market has a high demand for staff, that's one factor. And some teachers tell me that there isn't a salary scale. The salary scale has 2 levels of meaning. First of all, there is no standard. They can have high salaries and low salaries in the industry. Well, Chairman, I have two sets of figures to illustrate this. The salaries can range from 7,000 to 60,000, and on average, it's about 18,000. So the issue is, if you look at average figures, it's not too bad. But if you look at the range of salaries, that's very wide. Another difficulty is when they switch jobs, they stay in the industry. When they change jobs, past experience is not recognized, so they feel that is not fair. Another important aspect is working hours. Sometimes they work half day, full day. Sometimes it's very flexible. So there isn't very standard working hours. When they are married and have their own children, it would have a large impact. So there is a basket of factors that lead to turnover. So we're looking at it from these different angles. And I've also met with potential teachers who are about to enter the field, but the general feeling is that if there is professional development, career development, then 15 years free education, that is their vision. They would like to see it implemented as soon as possible so that morale and career development can be maintained. I'd also like to mention that turnover is affected by a basket of factors, so we need specific measures to deal with it. On parents' financial burden, perhaps I can defer to my colleague, Mrs. Betty. Thank you, Chairman. The audit report has pointed out in the first year of the voucher scheme, there were only 4 schools that charged less than the nominal value of the voucher. And up to now, there are 68 kindergartens. So we see it does help parents ease financial burden. Just now, legislators asked about other expenditure. So in our circular on fee increases, it's stated very clear. If schools need to charge fees such as birthday fees, graduation, activity fees, and so on, if they charge all students, then it should be charged under tuition. So in auditing tuition increase, the Education Bureau will examine each account for approval. In other words, after paying tuition fee, the necessary funds would be included in the tuition fee. Just now, legislators mentioned school uniform, stationery, exercise books, and so on. Schools offer these for sale, but parents have a choice. For example, school uniforms, they do not necessarily have to purchase winter or summer uniform every year. If they have siblings, they could use their siblings' uniform. So not every parent would have to make such a purchase, but I agree. A lot of parents would have to purchase these materials. We have to regulate the profit margins, and we tell the schools that these trading activities, this has to be stated to the parents. And we also require, when they apply for tuition increase, the accounts of trading activities have to be disclosed. And we require the schools to offer choice. They cannot force parents to conduct these transactions. And the 15% profit margin, since they are non-profit making, these profits cannot be used on a discretionary basis. It has to be spent back on the students. And we understand that parents might have expenditure other than tuition. And first of all, we ask the schools to set prices very carefully. It has to be set at a reasonable level. And but we will take note of the audit report's comments. In our future circulars, we will be very careful. We don't need legislators to notify us. We will regulate the school's trading activities, profit margins. We will examine their audit accounts, and we will regulate the profit margins of their trading activities. We'll conduct a lot of sharing, and we'll provide training. The audit report has provided a lot of information. We have to thank the Commissioner for his comments. If you look at paragraphs 2.19b, even though we have reduced parent burden, it doesn't mean that kindergarten education is free. If you look at previous subsidies, the increase was some 168%. It was much higher than tuition fee increase. So you can see that the government is reducing parent financial burden, but we understand society's expectations increase. We also see in paragraphs 2.24 or 2.25 areas of improvement. And we do strike a balance between parent financial burden and the monitoring of schools' fees, but there is still room for fine-tuning, and perhaps we need to differentiate compulsory items and optional items. So we agree that transparency needs to be enhanced. Regarding staff turnover, I'd like to refer you to 3.19. For an industry to develop healthily, we do need some turnover. If you look at turnover in non-voucher schools, it's larger than voucher schools. So the turnover, the reasons for turnover might be more than the voucher impact. For example, there might be a market effect. When the teacher has completed teacher education, they might transfer to a kindergarten that is more suitable to their needs. In Table 4 of paragraph 3.19, we see that 56% of turnover, they switch to another kindergarten. So that just reflects an improvement in status. So when the voucher still applies to the private sector, this turnover might be healthy. I can't say all of it is healthy, but I just want to point out that behind this turnover figure, there might be a basket of factors, and we cannot just assign it to one particular factor. The audit in the same table says the 56% of teachers who change to another school, the majority of them have a certificate of early childhood education or higher qualifications. So perhaps some teachers who left the voucher school to work in a non-voucher school, perhaps they don't have these qualifications. So from a quality perspective, some people who don't have the qualifications, they might switch to a different industry that might be good for the school children. So turnover ratio, perhaps it needs further investigation. Well, since we have elicited a series of responses from the questions, so I'll allow extra time. Well, the Permanent Secretary's comments are not available in the report. So the PS, she has her analysis of these issues, so perhaps she can assist the PAC in providing a written paper. The Assistant Secretary says that we don't have to wait for the Free Kindergarten Commission to draft its report. They can take immediate action. So perhaps we can have a list of actions that can be taken, because this would affect on the severity of our report. And I would boldly suggest to Chairman, as Chairman said, my first question has elicited very detailed responses, and they are very focused. So I suggest, Chairman, we don't need to discuss the individual items. We should rather have a free, focused Q&A. Well, if we don't have objections, then I agree that we can consolidate all the questions, and we don't have to examine the questions by chapter. Just now, Mrs. Ip and Mrs. Jia, do you have any difficulty in responding to our requests? Well, do we have definite figures or proof? Not necessarily. These were just some logical analysis, but I can provide some information, because we met with kindergartens, such as turnover, that has improved, and we can provide further information to assist your understanding of the situation. Mrs. Zip? Yes, we can provide a response on follow-up that could be performed. Mr. Leung Kai-chung, I need to declare interest. My 9-year-old son benefited from the voucher system, voucher scheme, but I think it was very minimal. The school fees, miscellaneous fees, stationery, school uniforms, travel fees, etc., were almost the same as the tuition that I had to pay.
Under the PVS, the basic principle relates to the financial arrangement, so I would like to raise questions on that front. Now, Mrs. Chair mentioned that in paragraph 2.19, that there is this table that from 2007 to 08 to 2012-13, then there is a 68% rise in the value of the fee subsidy. Now, if you look at page, paragraph 2.6, in 2007-08, the voucher value was $13,000. And then amount of a voucher attributed to fee subsidy was $10,000. So how did you come up with this $10,000? What factors did you take into account in coming up with this $10,000 from 2007-08 to 2011-12? The increase every year is just on a par with the inflation rate. I think the EDB is too lazy. When you made the adjustment. I thought you were basing that on the inflation rate around 5%. But then for the operating expenses of a kg, what is the how is it related to the inflation rate in terms of their operating expenses? Why is it so low at 5%? Well, please give an explanation on that. The basis and the rise percentage. Chairman, on the basis, we can see that in paragraph 2.18, when we introduced the voucher scheme, the weighted average weight is $15,000, 2/3 of the tuition fees. Now, Mr. Leung mentioned why did we adjust the voucher value only on the basis of inflation. As I said just now, as the administration, we have to act in accordance with our prescribed policies. And our positioning basically is not providing free pre-primary education. Our aim is really to strike a balance between the use of public funds and alleviating parents' financial burden, and we don't want to affect the KG's operations in the private market. So according to the commodity price adjustment, that is in line with what the Finance Committee's instructions in those times. So we can't act beyond what is what we are authorized to do. Chairman, I don't understand what kind of instruction is that. Is it the case that the Finance Committee prescribes the percentage rise, or is it the case that we aren't allowing you to have flexibility in your introducing percentage increase? Now, if for every government department, for every rise in the for things under their jurisdiction, if they are going to base that on inflation rate, then they don't have to do much. Then, do you take into account the actual operation of the KGs in raising the voucher value? We have a big civil service staff, over 160,000 people, so we have to follow certain rules. So in using public funds, we have to abide by the draft estimates and also the restrictions imposed by the Electoral Finance Committee. So if we find that the restrictions are outdated, then we would be looking for a policy review, and then we'll come back to the Finance Committee for changes. So because we're talking about public money, so we have to be careful. I hope that you would understand. Now, the voucher scheme is operating in a private sector. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of Mr. Leung, I just want to tackle it using an assumption. Now, if we introduce an increase based on the average tuition fee, then we are just trailing behind the market operation. And in that case, how can we ensure that public funds are spent in a value for money way? So that's why we have to strike a balance. If we have reservations on such a mechanism, now according to prescribed rules, we have to apply for a policy review, and then we have to seek endorsement from the Electoral Finance Committee. Well, Chairman, I don't get it. I don't think we're trying to chase the rise in the tuition fees. We're just trying to look at the actual operating costs of the KGs. Now, I would also like to follow up on a question on rental reimbursement. Now, for a KG, its operating costs, apart from the teachers' salaries, an important component is rental payment. In paragraph 2.26, Well, before the voucher scheme was introduced, the government has already introduced the rental reimbursement scheme. Now, for KGs covered under this voucher scheme, some of them are still receiving rental reimbursement, but others are not. Then, in paragraph 2.27, the Education Commission, in its 2010 review, said that the rental reimbursement scheme should continue, and then the review should be conducted from time to time. Now, for some KGs under this voucher scheme, some are getting rental reimbursement, others are not, and they're not operating in a level playing field. So how come that we are operating in this manner? That there are two categories of KGs. Can't we expand the rental reimbursement scheme a little bit? Is it also because that there is a restriction in the LegCo's Finance Committee? Mrs. Yip, thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question. I would like to respond to Mr. Leung's earlier question first. On the voucher value from 2007-08, 2013, from $13,000 to $16,800, and that was stated in a paper submitted to the Finance Committee, and that paper was endorsed by the Finance Committee. So we have to make adjustments and accordingly. Now there is another paper. There is another paper, FC 2011-12-38. In that paper, it states clearly that the adjustment will be made based on the CCPI after 2012-13. So for the next year, an adjustment will be made based on the changes in the CCPI. So the Permanent Secretary said just now that the adjustment was made based on what we were authorized to do. So can you provide us with the two papers that you mentioned later on? Yes. Kenneth Leung, I want to say that the policy was decided upon by the administration, and you came up with this proposal of CCPI and presented to the Finance Committee, and we were obliged to examine what you proposed. But if there were several other options presented to us in adjusting the voucher value, then we would be putting more efforts in scrutinizing the various options. But the only proposal that you presented then was just the CCPI. So actually you were using the CCPI in adjusting a lot of other subsidies like the CSSA. I think you were just simplifying the whole issue. My personal opinion is that we can, of course, look at the CCPI, but then there are also other factors in the operating expenses of KGs, and then the CCPI shouldn't suffice for reflecting their actual needs. All right, I would like to listen to the administration's response on the rental reimbursement. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leung. On the rental reimbursement, in the audit report, we introduced that scheme in 2008, and then we introduced the voucher scheme in 2007. So the schemes are being carried out in parallel. For the rental reimbursement scheme, when the schools come to us for adjustment in tuition fee, we would exclude the factor on rental. There are now 392 non-profit making KGs on the rental reimbursement scheme. There are some which are receiving the reimbursement, others are not. And then this is creating difficulties to their operations. So we accept the recommendation from the audit that in our study on the 15-year free education, we would also look and study the rental reimbursement scheme. But I would like to stress that it should not be the case that rental reimbursement be dispersed to all scheme KGs. If we are going to do that, we have to look carefully whether public funds are really used appropriately in such a way, because different KGs have different ways of operating and enrollment, and they are operating under different premises of different sizes. So if we adopt an across-the-board approach in dispersing rental and reimbursement, then a vicious cycle may be created. But then we understand or appreciate the audit's recommendations. We're going to further study that, but I think we should tread cautiously along that path. Now, the number of students in KGs can range from 14 to 1,400, and the rent it also ranges. So it's very difficult for us to adopt a across-the-board approach. Now, for every rental reimbursement application we vet, we would take reference from assessment by the Rating and Evaluation Department. And actually, we have to be very careful on the selection of the site of the premises and the size of the premises. We understand the members' concerned and also the audit report's suggestion. We would study them. Because Mr. Kenneth Leung has some other engagements, he might leave earlier. I would also like to follow up on the rental reimbursement. Mrs. Yip said that the public funds should be used appropriately and in a value for money manner. This is all very true. You said that you are going to study 15-year free pre-primary education, and you're not going to study the rental reimbursement scheme. Do you have a set-in-stone timetable? But you don't have a very specific timetable on when the free pre-primary education will be implemented. Mrs. Yip, you said that there are operational difficulties with rental reimbursement scheme because the size of the class differs. But can you not do something before the 15-year pre-primary free education is provided? Please look into it and consider it seriously, because some KGs are getting reimbursement and others not, and they're operating not on a level playing field. And you have a set of guidelines or regulations for allowing KGs to get into the scheme, and I think you can use that as a yardstick for allowing KGs to be enrolled in the scheme or not. Well, Secretary, thank you, Mr. Leung, for your comments. And in paragraph 2.27 in the audit report, this is precisely the recommendation that we're going to consider. Mr. Chen Hak-kim, thank you, Chairman. I would like to follow up on the aim of the voucher scheme on lessening parents' financial burden. If we look at the savings made by the parents, then of course we can see that the parents have made a lot of savings. Actually, tuition fees can be divided into two parts: tuition fees per se, and then also miscellaneous charges. Now, under the voucher scheme, it seems that the miscellaneous charges are getting higher and higher. I have some information on hand. from information obtained from the Finance Committee, under the voucher scheme system, half-day students, for half-day kgs, 4,611 in dollars in miscellaneous fees, and whole-day kgs, 15,797 dollars in whole-day kgs. These sums are very high. Now, if we look at paragraph 5.9, the report says that these miscellaneous charges take up around 24 to 44% of the school income. I think we need a mechanism to monitor how KGs charge these miscellaneous fees. Now, in the EDB's guidelines, the EDB stipulates that some miscellaneous charges have to be put into other operating income and also trading activities accounts. But then EDB doesn't have any clear guidelines on which items should go into which categories. Now, for example, tea and snacks fees, some kindergartens put it in under operating income, and then others in trading activities. So I think it boils down to a question of monitoring. So, Secretary, why can't you list categorically the items which should be monitored under the other operating income category, and which items should be covered under the trading activities? And actually, in the same, for some KGs, the items are put under one category, and for others, they are put under another category. Why do you let this happen? Do you allow this gray area, particularly for the KG, so that they can have more flexibility in the finance and accounting arrangements? Do you deliberately turn a blind eye to it, or are you trying to allow flexibility now? Well, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the members' comments. We have noted that, the phenomenon. According to existing practices, tuition fees cover certain items like birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, visits, and picnics. And these are all participated by all students, and these are covered tuition fees. And for other operating income, then these activities are optional. The audit report has raised this, and in our annual inspections, we find that certain or individual KGs are making such arrangements. So that's why we have raised these cases this time. Now, thirdly, members said rightly that because our guidelines are not clear enough, so the KGs are not knowing what to do. So we are arranging certain exchange sessions and to make certain items clear to KGs on where to put them. So that this is what we're going to do. Chairman, the aim of the PAC is to try to improve or plug any loopholes in existing systems. The Secretary said that there will be new guidelines and there will be new lists on the miscellaneous charges. I hope that you can forward your proposals for the committee's reference. Oh, okay, so this is will be the homework for Mrs. Yip. Chairman, I mentioned or I raised the question whether the Secretary is allowing flexibility for KGs in paragraph 5.12. There are 283 KGs which are making a deficit in the 2011-12 financial year. So if they are using up the maximum of the voucher value, then they're still incurring a deficit. Then it would be very difficult for them to continue their operation. So that's why they are trying to earn some other income to make up for the shortfall or deficit. So do you agree that actually the other income are making up the sort of shortfall in the operating costs?
From a policy angle, we'd like to see a high level of transparency, and because this money follow the parent scheme, the parents has or can choose where to send his children. So it's important that we include something useful in the voucher scheme. But sometimes the parents would like to have better, say, school bags, and some would require even diapers for younger pupils, but that would not be covered by the usual scope of the scheme. Mrs. Yip, in 5.12, we were referring to 2010-11 school year, and some kindergartens are suffering from or sustaining loss. When we vet application for school fee increase, we'll look at a number of factors, whether there's been accumulated surplus. If there's a big surplus, we'll advise the kindergarten not to increase these school fees by so much, because they can use some of their reserve or surplus in question. So for a particular year, we may approve a smaller increase, and that's why for a particular year they may suffer a loss, but only for that year. As for the trading income from trading activities, such as selling certain things, we allow kindergartens to do this, but we insist that the prices must be reasonable, and parents should not be coerced into buying those things from the kindergarten. And we also regulate the profit generated, and the generated profit must be brought back to the operation, to the kindergarten's own accounts for meeting other expenses of the kindergarten. But this has always been our thinking. We want to protect the interests of parents, and we suggest that the kindergartens should make the charges and fees open. The report suggests that in the school profile we publish miscellaneous fees and charges should be disclosed. We agree. In the next round of the kindergarten profile to be issued by us, we would heed the suggestion from the audit commissions, and more information will be disclosed. Let me ask a follow-up question. There are 280 kindergartens suffering from a loss after getting subsidy from the voucher scheme, and you think it's okay, then I would think the response is somewhat curious. So maybe you are being too stringent about the cap on tuition fees. These are non-profit making kindergartens. They are suffering from a loss, and they will not be able to retain good teachers or to offer better terms of conditions to retain good teachers. So how can you make some improvements in this regard, Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. I thank the member for his questions. This is one of the main areas where we need to look into. In the past, we provided a subsidy to reduce the financial burden. In the future, we will be talking about 3 years of free education. It's not a question about making a loss at a particular year or how much profit is earned. We will look at the best subvention level to provide subsidy to the sector. After setting up the committee on the 8th of April, it is not just a beginning of something simple. They are going to have 5 working groups. So one of them will be looking at resources and subvention mode. They have started their work. And for urgent matters, we would take those on board. And that's why in 2.27 we set out, we have taken on board the suggestions from the Audit Commission and asked the committee to look into those issues. I know that they also make use of a channel, the PTA, to generate income. For example, parents are required to pay a membership fee to join the PTA, and many of the activities organized are self-financed. Of course, they would say it's voluntary, but very few parents would refrain from participating in PTA activities. Do you have any regulation in this regard at this point? Mrs. Yip? Well, as I've said, PTA is not unique to kindergartens. We have PTAs in primary and secondary schools as well. In the Committee on School Parent Cooperation, we give money to schools with PTAs in the form of a subsidy for their activities. Of course, it's not a full subsidy for all PTA activities. So it's necessary to charge something on an item-by-item basis. First of all, PTA activities are organized by the PTA itself. For subvented primary and secondary schools and their PTAs, we do not regulate their own activity programs. And when it comes to PTA, it's actually about cooperation between the school and their parents. And they should not be asking for high fees to be paid in organizing their activities. They should have regard to the affordability of parents. So maybe you don't want to regulate the kind of activities they organize, but what about the maximum fees and charges that they can charge? Well, actually, if it's organized by the school or the kindergarten, then they will have to comply with our procedures in relation to procurement. But if it's something solely carried out by the PTA and parents are participating on a voluntary basis, then we have to think carefully whether we want to do micromanagement of all kinds of activity conducted in the school. And also on top, you have the alumni associations. By extension, should we also be regulating those activities as well? But if the school is involved in a PTA activity, then the school will have to comply with all the requirements that they need to comply with. But if it's done by the PTA on its own, then we have to consider very carefully whether regulation is really warranted. Mr. Ng Liang-sing. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to the Secretary's opening remarks, some members have offered their comments, and may I repeat something here? In the audit report, paragraph 2.16, there's an observation of audit. Audit has found that the voucher scheme had contributed to promoting KG education and easing parents' financial burden. But of course, there are some areas which have to be improved. And that's why I think the Secretary has borrowed this remark in his speech. I think we can all come to our own conclusions, but from the audit results, we can see for ourselves the contribution that has been made is 2.17, and that the Education Bureau informed this council in November 2012 that in Hong Kong, enrollment at KGs reached about 100%. And the Education Commission also reported in its 2010 review that about 85% of kindergarten students have received direct financial subsidies through the voucher scheme. So compared with the period before the voucher scheme was introduced, and we can just do a simple comparison that some improvement has been made. So we should call a spade and give credit where credits are due. Let me now turn to a question. It's 2.20. The EDB has informed audit that the voucher scheme has resulted in the availability of more high-quality kindergartens for parents, and then they would strive to improve this quality to meet the changing needs of parents. So I would like to get more information from the administrations on their efforts to achieve continuous improvement, what has been done, or what programs have been launched to achieve this. And it said that the Education Bureau has been implementing the scheme in accordance with the policy mandate as endorsed by the CE Council and within the ambit approved by the FC. This is very important. And we must carry out the mandate. And under subparagraph B, it refers to the policy design of the voucher scheme. In that, the government, on the one hand, wants to make available more choices, and also to maintain the kindergarten sector's flexibility and adaptability to meet market needs. Have you conducted a policy study to ascertain the market needs, and what has the sector done in response to maintain flexibility? And you also want to maintain the diversity of services. On what basis do you ascertain the diversity of services to meet changing needs of their children? Since you provide public subsidy, in the past the parents pay for this, and now there is also a subsidy. So what has changed because of that? Can you give us more evidence of your achievements?
多謝議員，呢個提問係好，呢個好提示。我再強調呢，就係我初時係嗰個第一、第。
Let me repeat that in the first and second paragraphs of my opening speech, I was actually referring to some points made by the kindergarten sector, and they have told us that they have been meeting with some difficulties, for example, the accounting difficulties and where to put certain items. And that's why we need to refer to this we must refer to the improvement made so far. But of course, we strive to seek continued improvement. I can ask my Deputy Secretary to tell you what we have been doing, some main points, and then we can look into details as well later. Deputy Secretary, under the voucher scheme, every parent who will be given a voucher if the child is enrolled in a kindergarten, and there's also a fee remission scheme. The two combined are there to make sure that no families, no children will be denied quality kindergarten's education because of lack of means. That's why we have been scrutinizing school fees very stringently. We have to make sure that the school fees are reasonable, so the parents can enroll their children to the quality kindergartens charging reasonable fees. Since the introduction of voucher scheme in 2007, we have been making constant improvements. In 2009, a number of measures were introduced to improve things. In 2010, under the Education Commission, a working group was set up to review the voucher scheme. And they also made some recommendations. So in 2009, 2010, and 2011, we have made some major improvements. For example, in relation to the fee remission scheme, we did something to improve. The maximum amount of remission was based on the weighted average school fees. And that is to say, if the school fees concerned are below the weighted average, then they would get a subsidy of the full fees or half or quarter of the fees. We look at the weighted average to assist those who lack the means. And also in calculating the fee remission, we look at the actual fees, the difference between the actual fees and the weighted average to decide whether the remission level should be 100%, 50%, or 75%. Such a calculation would benefit families with financial difficulties. In the past, when we assess the needs, we look at the financial income and also the social needs. And after the review, we relax the scheme by doing away with the assessment of social needs. We just look at the financial ability. And also we make adjustments to the amount of remission by referring to the CPIA. And some kindergartens have to carry out additional administrative measures since joining the voucher scheme. Therefore, we have make some adjustments, and that the voucher will be provided in accordance with the installments of school fees that the kindergarten collects fees. Either it's 10 or 12, we follow their cycle so as to reduce their workload. And there were some previous questions raised by members concerning revision to the amount. From 2012-13, the value of the voucher scheme will be adjusted based on CCPI. So that's what we have been doing, and from time to time we would introduce improvement measures to the voucher scheme since its inception. Some members asked about the framework or the policy study on which we base our improvements. As the Secretary has pointed out, we look at the mandate of the policy mandate of the CE in Council. We work within that framework, and we also make our adjustments based on the relevant electrical documents, and that's the framework, and that's the rules that we have to follow to deal with financial matters.
So aside from circulars on information they need to provide in tuition increase and what needs to be disclosed, so since implementing the voucher scheme for the participating kindergartens, we will receive audited accounts. We will examine their financial arrangements. If it's inadequate or if they do not comply with guidelines, we will issue warning letters and urge them to rectify. And over the last few years, when the schools have a better understanding of our policies, they have improved. Another area, we will pick 10% of kindergartens to do a audit inspection. If we discover inadequacies or contraventions of our guidelines, we will issue them with a management guideline, and through open disclosure, we enhance transparency. So the accountability transparency system, this is explained in our financial funding document. So in light of this principle, we clarify our requirements. We do have updates, and you need to understand whether it's the kindergartens or the department. This is a large funding requirement to schools, so the schools need time to adapt to our requirements. So in this respect, we will continue to work with the schools on financial management. Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to follow up. The parents' needs are changing all the time, so have you tried to follow up the user satisfaction? What has been met, and where there are still shortfalls? Now, just now, I mentioned improvement measures, especially in the ceiling of tuition subsidies. And on means testing, we have relaxed that because we have heard parents' views and introduced these new measures. I'd like to point out that our review is not just looking at schools or school-sponsoring bodies. We also meet with parents. For example, I mentioned administrative work is rationalized. That's input from schools. Parents tell us how these subsidy ceilings and formula for subsidies, how these can be adjusted, and we do take on board input from different stakeholders, and of course we will continue to listen and continue to fine-tune our work. The question was very good. For example, I've met with parents on different engagement sessions where they call for parent education. So we do run some parent education courses. Well, I suggest there should be some record of the users for future audit reference. It seems that we're discussing the voucher scheme policy. If you look at value for money, we are spending $2 billion. Is it being spent wisely? Does it live up to expectations? And there are only two expectations. One being enhancing teacher qualifications. So in the whole audit report, he covers a lot of ground. He's done the legislator's work. In the past, in the education panel, we had very thorough discussion. Every once in a while, in the education panel, we talk about the voucher scheme. But now, the CY Leung government wants to set up a committee under the Education Bureau to look at 15 years free education. In fact, they're just looking at the 3-year kindergarten, free kindergarten education. So the audit report is very timely. But if there's no improvement, then you can call it a day, because the voucher system is subsidizing the parents. They don't want to manage the school. You cannot interfere with the kindergarten administration. When it is free education, when you subsidize the schools, then you can interfere with the school, just like primary and secondary schools. But here, today, if they talk about specific measures, then we can expect standard answers. The audit report has a lot of recommendations, and usually you'll say, yes, I'll accept some, I'll consider some, and some measures are in fact in place. So aside from value for money, because that is the expert opinion of the Audit Commission, do we meet the expectations? So, Chairman and colleagues said we shouldn't look at it on a chapter-by-chapter basis. We should look at the policy. But if free education is implemented, then we can call it a day. Can we understand it as such? Because I feel there's no point in asking specific questions, but in dealing with the voucher scheme, there are some areas of concern, and we can touch upon these. In paragraph 2.4, it says, in a wholly private market, only non-profit making kindergartens would be eligible. So has the Education Bureau considered the non-profit making kindergartens? Can they operate in a wholly private market even if when they receive this funding? This is very important. We have 700 odd out of 800 odd kindergartens participating in the voucher scheme. Some well-known schools don't need this voucher scheme. They have their own debenture schemes. We have friends calling us to help them enroll in these. Well, my grandchildren are just enrolled in normal kindergarten, so I think it's not important. Well, you want non-profit making kindergartens to be eligible in the voucher scheme. But if they can't survive in the private market, it's useless. So that leads to the second question. Would like the Secretary to answer. Mrs. Yip is familiar with the details, but I would like the Secretary to respond to policy questions. My question here is that, has the Education Bureau considered non-profit making kindergartens that participate in the voucher scheme? Can they operate in a wholly private market when they don't need to charge miscellaneous fees to maintain a healthy financial situation? So I'd like the Secretary to respond. You asked for a policy response, and I'll respond. First of all, we look at what non-profit making is. So in 09, 06, and Professor Goh Yin-meng had researched a lot of data. So we have requirements on transparency. We had these listed in our guidelines. We can see that some 60% of kindergartens can operate with a small profit, whether they are not in the red. And I have visited some kindergartens, so I have data that I can provide. Some say that they are willing to operate at a loss. It's their education belief. So they are not profit driven. They feel it is a vision, a principle, and that explains how they survive. And the third part is that we have kindergartens in housing estates. So the rents are much easily handled. So even in the private market, they have their own rental arrangements. They are not regulated by market rental rates. They can still survive, and they also have very innovative methods. For example, a kindergarten in Meifu, they operate in a private space. They use the neighboring parks and podiums, and they can survive, and they can maintain the 1:15 teacher-student ratio, and they also have the certification. So I can tell you, Hong Kong has a lot of NGOs that are very successful, and that is a characteristic of Hong Kong that has been mentioned by the McKinsey report. Well, the Secretary has not answered my question. You have not responded to my question. Because when a kindergarten participates in a voucher scheme, 80% is subsidies are directly aimed at the student. But it would give rise to tuition income. There is a ratio of the subsidy versus the tuition fee. So they need to charge miscellaneous items to balance their books, and they need to compete with other kindergartens as well. So I think the Education Bureau is very clear how much each school charges and how much miscellaneous charges are applied. The Education Bureau had studied the voucher system prior to 07. You should have investigated tuition fee the ratio of tuition fee versus the voucher scheme subsidy. How many kindergartens can recover most of their costs? And for kindergartens running at a substantial loss, aside from those who are willing to operate at a loss, maybe it's because they have some big SSBs, school sponsoring bodies. So have you done any statistics or investigation to see how you can assist them? And I'm concerned that full day and half day schools, what's the ratio? Two points. In the subsidy scheme, we can provide more figures later on, but there are only 68 schools that charge below the nominal value of the voucher. We do have rental remissions, so we do provide different levels of assistance so that they can perform. So the majority of schools can operate above the level of 16,800, and some of these are half-day schools. So this is the current situation. What's important is in the future, 3-year free kindergarten education. The audit report says that it will assist the future policy. Chairman, I don't want my time to be wasted on, of course, the future, the 3-year free kindergarten. Of course, it's constructive. Do you want him to respond to the ratio of half-day, full-day kindergartens? Full-day make up 30%. 70% are half-day. So there are a lot of different modes. And my question is, for schools operating at a substantial loss, are they mostly full-day schools, and what's the ratio between full-day and half-day schools operating at a loss? I can provide the figures later on. In paragraphs 2.14, it mentions there are some small schools, 282 small and having less than 100 students and less than 13 students. So what can you do to assist these schools? Mrs. Yip, have you looked into their operations? Well, a lot of our discussions, we would like them to maintain their flexibility. So their operation size is very different from primary, secondary schools. We encourage nearby schooling, so they are scattered throughout Hong Kong, and because they are scattered, their sizes tend to be small. That is inevitable. And to a certain extent, that is the parents' expectations. They don't want their children to travel. So for schools less than 100 students, we understand their operations. Imagine if they have 30 students in 2 groups, and there are only 3 classes. So normally we'd have about 90 students. So under this operation, we'd like to say there are arrangements. They still have the 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio.
There are also support staff like clerical staff. So on the application for tuition rise, we will consider that based on their enrollment size and their operating costs. So currently, only some 20 kgs have reached the tuition fee ceiling, and most of them haven't reached that ceiling yet. And also we have an weighted average tuition fee, and most of the KGs are charging a tuition fee at a level below the weighted rate. The weighted average tuition fee is $20,000, and then the school wage ceiling is $25,200. So generally, half of the schools or KGs are above the weighted score, and half are below. So on average, parents have to pay a tuition fee on average $3,000. And for families in difficulties, they can apply for fee remission from us. So for a KG, actually, they receive both the voucher value and also the fee remission. So for whatever items we find reasonable, we would allow those to be included in the application for tuition fee rise. Now, families in financial difficulties can also apply for fee remission, and also the fee remission in entirety is dispersed to the KGs. So the KG is not receiving just the voucher amount in that case. So can you be brief in your follow-up question? I would save that for the next round. Mr. Chen Hak-kim in the second round. Thank you, Chairman. I want to talk about quality of education. In paragraph 3.8, around 98% of the principals had completed the certification course, and around 13 principals, 2%, had yet to complete the course. And 1,203, 40% of the teachers have not received the CECE or equivalent qualification. So, Chairman, I want to follow up. For those who have not yet met the qualifications, how many of them are pursuing the relevant courses, and how many have never enrolled in such courses? So can the Secretary provide us with the figures? Yes, Mrs. Yip, please. Thank you, Chairman. I want to point out here that the certificate requirement for principals under the voucher scheme, the serving principals are encouraged to enroll in the certification course. But for newly enrolled principals, they have to be degree holders and also completed the certification course. Now, for the teachers, using the 1.1 to 15 ratio, the teachers should hold a certificate in early childhood education. So for the 13 principals who have not completed the certification course, they are not contravening the requirement. Now for the 13 of them, 6 are pursuing the course at the moment. And for teachers, 1,203 teachers, among them, a majority of them are pursuing the certificate course. Around 300 odd are not studying the course. We have tried to understand how the situation is like, and it is really the teachers' own individual intentions or plans, and for various reasons they don't want to pursue the study. Maybe it's because of age or other family reasons or other considerations. So members may be concerned that whether we would have a sufficient number of certificate teachers or principals joining the sector. Actually, we have tried to ascertain the situation from tertiary institutions from in the year 12-13. Those pursuing degree courses in early childhood education, the number is 800 odd. The Bachelor of Education, 819 will graduate in 13-14. And for certificate course, 577 will graduate in 12-13, and then 476 will graduate in 13-14, and some 1,300 or 1,400 will graduate every year, and they can join the sector. The secretary said that some 300 or some teachers are still studying, are not willing to study. If these teachers are not prepared to gain the qualification, will it have an adverse impact on the quality of our KG education? Would the government draw a line, say, within a certain period, teachers must meet the relevant qualifications, because a lot of time has been allowed for the teachers to study, and quite an amount of money has also been spent. Would you be doing that? Now, for the 300 who are not pursuing the study, what will happen to them? Chairman, serving teachers who have studied or are pursuing the study is the percentage 97%, and only a minor portion is not prepared to study. Some of them decline to further studies because of age, because they may retire in a couple of years' time. And more importantly, the absolute figure is 300, but then if you take into account the number of teachers, 11,000 in the entire industry, the percentage is really small. And then there will be new blood coming in, 1,300 or so, so over 10% newcomers joining the trade. So for the 300 teachers in question, the actual operation of the KGs is like this. We have a 1-to-15 teacher-student ratio requiring certified teachers to be the one teacher. This KG will hire extra staff to assist in the teaching work. So the 300 or so teachers are QKT teachers, and they can help with other works, say in organizing certain activities. So I want to say that under the voucher scheme, one of the requirements for the KG is to reach a 1-to-15 teacher-student ratio in terms of the number of qualified teachers. We'll ensure that they meet with these requirements before they can enroll in the scheme. Well, I agree with what the administration says, but I want to say that the percentage of teachers not reaching the relevant requirements, 3.4% or 3.8%, and 57% or 27% are non under the non-voucher KG and non-scheme KGs. All right. On the turnover of teachers, we talk about the stability of the workforce is directly related to the quality of education. So, has the Education Bureau conducted a study on the relationship between turnover rate and the pay for teachers, so that we have attractive pay to retain the quality KG teachers? Secretary or Mrs. Yip? As what the Permanent Secretary said, there are several points. Turnover, first, that they leave the sector altogether. Of course, we are very concerned about that. We are looking at the supply and demand of teachers. In the past 5 years, the turnover rate has consistently dropped from 11% to 7% now. 11% 5 years ago, I mean. And members are also very concerned about the change of jobs among KGs, teachers going to another KG from one KG. There are various reasons behind. Pay is one. Other factors may include the working conditions, environment, management of the KG, the cooperation among the team in the KG, and also personal reasons of the teachers. Maybe they want to work near where they live. So pay may be one, but then it may not be the sole reason. We can't make any conclusions on the reasons yet. Now, for primary and secondary schools, individual school may suffer a high turnover rate for one academic year, and then that rate may rise later. So, in the report, it mentions that there are several KGs which have a high turnover rate. We have actually inspected these KGs, and we will try to ascertain the reasons, but we didn't go into a very specific study. But from what we've done, we can tell that is because maybe because of the change in the principal, or the teachers maybe have certain opinions on the reforms and the requirements in a KG, and teachers would then like to change their work environment. Now we look at how the situation fares for these KGs we have examined, and I think actually the figure has improved a lot, and is not as high as what was mentioned in the report. So, for the turnover rate, it may fluctuate. It may not be high consistently. So the same goes for primary and secondary schools. Say in one school, half of the teachers may want to change their work environment. And actually the pay level for primary and secondary schools is quite stable. In fact, some of them, the pay level is quite high. So I can only say that there is a basket of factors for KG teachers to change KGs. So under the voucher scheme, I can say that actually that the turnover rate is relatively lower than the days when the voucher scheme was not in place. So we would, according to the recommendations of the report, look at the situation when we conduct reviews on the KGs, and when we notice that there is a consistently high turnover rate, we will try to understand more about the reasons, and we'll try to, based on those reasons, come up with some proposals. Secretary, do you have anything to, something to supplement? Yes, the member's point is really important. Now, the percentage of over 90% is quite high, but we can look at it from two perspectives. If we look at the Institute of Human Resources report on the turnover rate, and actually we record a double-digit figure in terms of the turnover rate. Now, I think we should also focus on how to attract and retain staff in the sector, and I agree that talent management is important, and we should undertake more study in that front. The next one should be Mr. Alan Leung, but we're near the 11 a.m., which we have scheduled for a break. So do you want to continue asking now, or do you want to take a break now? All right, I want to go on asking. Chairman, the Secretary mentioned about retaining talents. But then, if you just adjust the tuition fee ceiling based on inflation rate, I'm very worried that it's all empty talk. Chairman, I would like the Secretary to refer to page 65. And Table 6 shows that the participation by KGs in the voucher scheme has continuously declined from 2007-08 to 12 to 13, from 768 to 735. In 2007-08, the number of students is 86 out of 100 students are participating, and then for 11-12 is 79 out of 100. I try to understand why, and some members have actually come up with some suggestions, and unfortunately we don't have an answer. On the 8th of April, the Committee on Free KG Education was appointed, and the term is 2 years, and they are not magicians, these members. Some KGs may be renting a premises in the peak, and some in public housing estates. The rental may differ substantially. And also, in 2011-12, the principals and the teachers should attain certain qualifications, but they haven't been able to do that. And then there is also the question of quality assessment. There are a total of 32 indicators, very complicated. We'll save that for the next session. Is it possible? Well, these problems won't go away when the committee, after the committee has been appointed. So how can we address all these recommendations made by the Audit Commission in 2 years' time? And we don't see any solutions to these problems. Mr. Kenneth Leung asked about paragraph 2.6, and there is footnote on that page. As the EDB had informed the electrical panel, the provision of fee subsidy had built in roughly a 10% increase between years to compensate for inflation, teachers' salary increment, and qualification development over the years. But just now, Mrs. Yip, Deputy Secretary, told us that the tuition fee ceiling will be adjusted based only on inflation, and she's missed out criteria number 2 and 3. But then criteria number 2 and 3 are definitely going to happen. Salary increment and qualification development all need huge amounts of money. From papers in the education panel, we see that there are 3 factors, and then 2 are missing from what Mrs. Yip said. And then the Committee on Free KG Education will take 2 years to finish its work. I don't think that they can do that within 2 years, and they haven't come up with a direction as to how to address all the problems we've mentioned. So my question for the Secretary is, in 2 years or even a longer time, will the administration consider raising the voucher value and also the raising the tuition fee ceiling? Well, I am very sympathetic towards KGs. They have only 3 routes to take. Number 1, is they will still go on operating even if they are incurring a loss, because it's their ideal, their vision and mission, and they want to continue with their operation to realize their mission. That's one possibility. The second is they are very mean to their teachers. And the third option is they would raise or charge more miscellaneous fees, as what the Audit Commission suggested. The Secretary didn't admit that they are allowing them to charge miscellaneous fees to gain more income. Now, if you don't want them to close down, to incur a deficit, or to be mean to their staff, or to charge miscellaneous fees, then would you consider that in the interim period, before you implement 15-year free education, you can raise the voucher value and also relax the tuition fee ceiling?
Okay.
Are you going to do it, Secretary? Let me say something about the figures first. The member referred to the number of KGs leaving the voucher scheme. Here, two notes are relevant. At the beginning, we have 700 to about 800 KGs joining the scheme. Some of them are profit-making KGs, but they try to switch to the non-profit operation mode, so that they try to achieve this. So some of them left against that background. If we just look at the non-profit making KGs, in 07-08, 780 of them joined the scheme. In 2012-13, we have 768 rather. So it's a 98% participation rate. In 2013, we have 757 non-profit making KGs, and 735 of them are in that scheme, or 97% of them have joined the scheme. If we compare the percentages, the change is not that significant. Secondly, from our contact with the kindergartens, we know that in terms of pay scale, the retention and development of their teachers, these are regarded as important. And also we refer to the weighted average and the reference point of below the weighted average. And I don't have to wait for 2 years before we get a report from the committee. We can deal with urgent matters urgently, but I have to respect the fact that the committee has just been appointed. At the first meeting will be convened soon. So at the end of this month, they will look into this very first issue. I must give some time to the committee for dealing with this. And we have experts on real estate, management and accounting and manpower on the committee. So they can look at these matters as urgent issues, and a review can be conducted. So I'm not going to say what we are going to do exactly at this point, because we have to respect the committee's deliberations. So they will have regular meetings, and we'll come back to the update members. And also we have representatives from the kindergarten sector, including teachers, who will be involved. So we'll be looking at ways to recruit and retain people, and also to enhance professional development. Strictly speaking, the committee is on 15 years free education, not just kindergarten education. But members are asking for improvement in the meantime to the voucher scheme. As I've said, for urgent issues, the review will take place sooner. All right, so the Secretary has told us that they would review the urgent issues urgently. Maybe he can tell us what are regarded as urgent issues requiring the immediate attention. We need to know this. In writing our report, he also refers to the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education. You talk about teachers being represented on my list. There's only one, Ms. Lai-him. The others are not teachers. Maybe the Secretary's list is not the same as mine. And also there are other people knowledgeable about real estate. There are only 3 lay members who are not from the kindergarten sector. Maybe they are the people who hold those specialty knowledge. To wrap up, I would like the Secretary to take a look at paragraph 5.11 and 5.12, and when our Secretariat writes up the report, maybe these points should be taken up. In paragraph 5.11, some 20% of the schools half-day classes are charging school fees close to the ceiling. On 5.12, and there are 280 kindergartens incurring net deficits. And for those who are not incurring losses, the Secretary will understand that they are charging a lot of miscellaneous fees. So can we just sit here and wait until the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education comes to some suggestions before we see improvement? Very soon, September, there will be another school year coming. It's already April and May. Well, this is not a healthy development, unless you disagree. If you think this is not healthy, then I think more kindergartens would leave the voucher scheme so that they can charge whatever fees they like, and they will be just become independent and self-financing. Well, what are urgent issues, Secretary? Well, the working group, let me clarify a point. The committee has 20 members, but there will be 5 working groups. Each of them would carry out very substantive discussions on substantive suggestions. There are quite a few of them. If we talk about a dozen a working group, then we have a wide participation from the community for the working groups. And as for losses and surpluses, it's about the year 2010-11. Things have actually improved since then. We have tried to ascertain whether the losses or the or deficits are for the short term or for a particular year. But I think the financial position has been improving. I'm not saying that it's a healthy situation. But I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of the committee. The chairman of the committee and their working groups are working very hard. On Wednesday, when they had the first meeting, I already raised these issues in the audit report with them. Chairman, to facilitate our record making and to make sure that our record is accurate, my understanding of the Secretary's reply is that there's been some policy change. In paragraph 2.6, there are 3 elements, 3 criteria to decide on the ceiling value. Instead of 3 factors, now we have 1, and that is teacher salary increment and qualifications are no longer part of the policy consideration. Can I have a confirmation of this? Deputy Secretary. It's really about the way we determine the amount of voucher in the first place, what we considered in the first place. And then in the 2011 LegCo panel paper, we talk about adjustment to the voucher value. And we make it very clear then that it would be based on the CCPI. Maybe I can explain why we consider those factors in the past, and in 2011 we considered a different factor. When we devise a scheme, we would like to give the kindergartens 5 years to upgrade their teachers' qualifications up to the certificate, the CECE level. And we understand that the kindergartens would raise their salary as necessary. And that's why the voucher value will increase in such a way that this factor will be included. So the idea was after 5 years, the teachers would have to reach this certificate level. And in the 5 years, the kindergartens would adjust salaries accordingly. And after 5 years, well, the idea back then that after 5 years, the teacher would have the salary set at a certain level in accordance with the duties and responsibilities, and then thereafter we would adjust the value of the voucher in accordance with inflation. And that's why in the first 4 years of the scheme, there was a part not for parents but for teachers and principals to upgrade their professional qualifications. So the idea was we wanted to give them 5 years to upgrade their qualifications, and the value of the voucher would also take into account the salary increases in the 5-year period. And then after that we'll proceed to another stage, and then we would apply the same adjustment mechanism which is based on inflation to the voucher, just like our other subventions. We set this out very clearly in the FC submission in 2011. But of course, we understand members' comments, and the audit report also suggested that we look at the voucher value again. The Secretary has already told you that the matter has been referred to the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education. And there are some suggestions in the report concerning the way forward. And that's why we have been telling members that in the deliberations of the committee and in our consideration, we would take on board the audit's recommendations. All right, the Deputy Secretary has told us the history of this. But what is not in dispute is that you are not getting what you wanted. There's teachers and principals who have not reached the required qualification levels in 5 years' time. So I'm going to follow up this matter in the next session. And before we end this session, I want to say this to the Secretary. He said that it's not quite bad as figure 6 in the report, because things are constantly being improved. To facilitate the write-up of our report, maybe the Secretary can give us a written reply, and that is in which areas are we seeing continuous improvement, so that we must just look at paragraph 7.8 and figure 6 for our conclusion, because we are told, he said, there has been continuous improvement, but what I see is a gradual deterioration. So maybe the Secretary can give us some supplementary information, orally or in writing. Maybe, Secretary, can you say something about the point on continuous improvement? Here we're talking about two situations. First, whether we have many kindergartens leaving the voucher scheme. I told you some figures that it was a difference between 98% and 97% for non-profit making kindergartens. So it's not very different. As for teachers' wastage rate, or the profit or losses incurred by kindergartens, we believe that things have improved. I can supplement with more information later. I don't want to hold up our break, but instead of 98%, it's 97%. You cannot see this as an improvement, whatever way you see it. Well, the first thing is about the figures, and the second is about the wastage of teachers, and also the financial health of the kindergartens. But that's why I want to have more details. In the oral testimony, he has not given us a full account. I asked you questions, and I was referring to 5.11 and 5.12. You can also take a look now, page 48 of the English version. 280 kgs are suffering from net deficits. He said this might be a one-off event or cyclical or seasonal. And from what you've learned, things are improving. That's why I want to get more details. I hope the Secretariat can help the PAC further in this regard. All right, maybe we can take a 15-minute break, and then when we return, the Secretary may supplement and also provide reply in writing if necessary.